Hey, what's going on, everybody? We got Mick Walker here, covers Purdue for the Boiler Sports Report and the 24/7 Sports Network. We're going to talk about Branson Deen, kind of player he is, newest Miami transfer, the sixth in the offseason. Just Mick, how are you doing here?
Good. How are you? I'm doing pretty good. I can only imagine how busy it is for you guys down there with all the transfer portal action.
Yeah, it's exciting for Miami. You got the transfers, the recruiting class, a lot of excitement in the offseason after a year of disappointment. So they're hopefully getting things turned around and moving forward here with a guy like Branson. He's intriguing. Just kind of looking at his career from afar, kind of researching him a little bit, going into his sixth year of college. I guess just talk about last season. We'll get into kind of his progression as a player, but last season in particular, what would you kind of make of Branson's year?
Yeah, Branson, along with the other defensive tackle, Lawrence Johnson, who transferred to Auburn. Branson was the starting three technique, and Lawrence was the starting one technique, and those two together formed a pretty formidable pass rushing duo. Branson was able. He's not a big 300-pound plus guy. He's a three technique. He's around 280, 290. So he's someone that they often allow to get after the passer, put on stunts, and just find a way for him to pressure the quarterback. He does struggle a little bit to get moved in the run, but he's still graded out when you go to the PFF numbers and all that type of stuff as a good run defender. But his real prime area was as a pass rusher.
Yeah, and I kind of watched one of his interviews where he was talking about playing with Lawrence. He's got the A, I've got the B gap kind of mentality. Just how does he kind of complement another defensive tackle? Because Miami's got some guys. They brought in another transfer as well, but just maybe how he kind of works pairing alongside another defensive tackle when he's kind of at his best playing with someone else.
Yeah, like we said, so he's not the biggest guy, so he's good in space, and that's what if you have that other defensive tackle, that one guy that can occupy an A gap, eat up two blockers, and then you're able to with your ends to get two guys on the edge, and then you're able to allow Branson to have a one-on-one with a guard. That's a matchup I think Miami, Purdue, or anybody that had Branson on their roster would have felt comfortable with him in as a one-on-one pass rusher against any guard.
So Branson's been a starter the last 3 years. He's a guy, like I said, 6 year in college, coming up in 2023. So last year, 28 tackles, 4 for loss, 2.5 sacks. The year before, I'm curious about your thoughts on this. So the year before, the counting stats were a little bit better. 26 tackles, 9.5 for a loss, 4 sacks. Was there something different in 2021 and in 2022 that maybe the numbers dropped off in terms of tackles for loss, the sack numbers?
Yeah, so I mean, the big thing different is the guy that was out beside him on the edge, George Karlaftis, is now with the Kansas City Chiefs, and so you can't double away from you're allowed to focus on Branson and Lawrence Johnson, who we mentioned a little bit more earlier. They're allowed to focus on those guys instead of shifting alignment towards George Karlaftis, so you can't have that guy that's taking away attention on the edge. So when you focus on those guys, which were Lawrence and the Branson Deen were the two best defensive linemen that Purdue had. One of the probably the two best defensive players that Purdue had consistently. So when you're able to focus on those guys, I imagine that's why the statistical output stepped down a little bit.
As you mentioned, not the biggest guy listed, 6'2", 280. You've touched on his weight, kind of just being the range he typically is at. You touched on his pass rushing ability. What do you kind of notice there that he does well to get in the backfield, whether it's pass rushing or just getting in the backfield? What's he do well? Again, not the biggest guy, but obviously he's getting some productive numbers at times.
Yeah, so obviously in the trenches as a defensive lineman, it's a hand-to-hand combat type of thing, and Branson does a good job getting that initial punch with the hands and being able to control the offensive lineman before they can control him. Because like we said, if he's a guy that if offensive linemen are able to get their hands on him, he might struggle some because of his size, but does a good job of getting hands on him, working at whether it's a chop, a swim, those type of moves to get off of disengagement of offensive lineman and go make plays either as a pass rusher or a run defender.
Miami's other defensive lineman that they brought in, Thomas Gore out of Georgia State, obviously he's going to take a step up in competition with his transition. With a guy like Branson, he's been in the Big Ten and faced some top teams there in that regard. How has he done kind of when he's faced maybe the better offensive lines in the conference against those top teams so far?
Yeah, so I mean, against you look at some of the teams that Purdue played, they were able to keep the Penn State run game in check for the most part, which is one of the better run games. They did struggle against Michigan in the Big Ten championship, and a lot of teams struggle in that, and that's against Michigan with that run game because that's what they're made to do. But still, I think you saw against most of the teams that Purdue played that Branson was able to impact really and cause a disruption from that three technique spot. because of how quick he plays, how he gets off and uses his hands.
You touched on the success that Purdue had this past year, the year before, the 9 wins, kind of breaking through a little bit. These last couple of years being a part of that, obviously with where Miami's at and their standpoint, they're trying to get back to some winning ways. Is there something that you think maybe Branson could bring to the table in terms of knowing what it takes, to win games at a high level and eventually, like I said, play for a title there?
Yeah, and I think what you mentioned earlier, this is Branson's 6th year. He didn't have to play college football this year. He wanted to come back. He found his place, like Miami, that he thought would fit him, that a place where he thought he could have an impact. And I think that's the biggest thing is he bought into that coaching staff's message about what they had planned going forward. And I think as a guy, knowing how he was as a leader for this Purdue team, you think he's a guy that's going to buy into that Miami coaching staff's message at Miami, and then spread it throughout the team, which seems to be what the Hurricanes need, is just guys that are bought in.
Yeah, so we've touched on his stats the last couple of years. Both of those years, he was all Big Ten honorable mention. He earned honors there. So he's gotten some recognition there. And again, you touched on the PFF numbers. I just want to kind of give it to our fans there that are watching. So 74.2 was his overall defensive grade this past season, 66.1 in the run, and 78.1 on pass rush. We touched on his numbers, what he's kind of bring to the table. I'm curious your thoughts on, we keep talking about his years in college, year 6 coming up. He's a guy that's redshirted, been a backup, been a starter. Leadership wise, where do you kind of stand with Branson in terms of that? Because again, he's going to be one of the older guys in the locker room. He has a lot of experience. What can you say about his leadership qualities, leadership style coming to a new team?
Yeah, I mean, Branson, I don't know him much personally, but watching how he interacted with his teammates, he's a guy, because of how impactful him and the other defensive tackle were. They were well respected by the whole defense, and they played a huge impact on the success of this team when it comes to stopping the run, because that's really what Purdue's defense was based on this year, is they were able to stop the run. They gave up a lot of big plays through the secondary, but this defensive line in particular, with Lawrence Johnson and Branson Deen going to Miami, they were able to stop the run. And I think that leadership, that those guys being who they were for that team, just show kind of the leadership they have when it comes to how respected they were by the teammate.
So we've touched on, his pass rushing ability, his ability to get in the backfield, things like that, just with his attributes. I'm curious about stopping the run. He's talked about it, wants to be better against that. Purdue last year was kind of middle of the pack in the conference, stopping the run. How do you feel like he is stopping the run? Maybe some things he's able to do or looking to do when he's trying to stop the run there.
Yeah, no, I like we talked about, I think he's very effective when it comes to, if he's able to get one-on-one with an offensive lineman where he can disengage from blocks, whether it's pass rush or stopping the run. I think the thing where he struggles is as that 280-pound guy, when you get those double teams, he's got to work on being able to split those double teams, still find a way to get penetration, not get moved off the ball, so that way he can be an impact player when he's in a double team or just really through all phases of stopping the run.
Mick, do you have any recruiting stories with Branson? Anything you kind of remember about him as a recruit? Former 3-star recruit, according to the 24/7 Sports Composite Rankings, the class of 2018 out of Lawrence Central there in Indianapolis. Miami fans are aware of that school if they follow the basketball program with Nigel Pack. But just anything, any memories, any thoughts on Branson? Anything you remember about him as a recruit?
Not much, because when it comes to Purdue, I've only been doing that for about a year now, so I haven't gotten to know Branson much as a person off the field as much as I have some of these guys that are more recent. But everything I've heard about him, from talking to the defensive line coach Mark Hagan to talking to the guys around the program, or former defensive line coach Mark Hagan, I should say, the guys around the program, he was a very well respected guy. He's someone that Purdue would have liked back because obviously of the impact he had. But for him to go and find a place in Miami, I think everyone in Indianapolis is very excited for him. And I think even some people around Purdue are excited for him.
Got it. All right. Well, thanks, Mick. I appreciate you taking the time to kind of break down Branson. Your time is valuable. I'll let you get going.
All right. I appreciate it. Thanks, Chris.